Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to yet another episode of Fraud O'Clock. I am your host, Katleho Seqapotsa, and this is a podcast brought to you by the ACFESA. Today, I have a very special guest once again. She's from TransUnion. And yes, thank you, Amritha. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Katleho. It's a pleasure.
Amritha is a seasoned executive with experience across financial services, banking, and healthcare sectors. She has held various leadership positions in the industry, including as executive head of fraud risk management at a leading bank, and is active in developing strategies to mitigate fraud risk across different sectors. She served as a board member of the SA Fraud Prevention Services, as a risk council member for Visa, and a fraud council member for MasterCard. Ms. Reddy holds a business management certification from UCT's Graduate School of Business and is a certified fraud examiner. Thank you once again for availing yourself. So, Amritha, before just diving into the thick of things, can you please give our viewers and listeners out there just a brief description of what TransUnion does and what role it plays in our daily lives?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So TransUnion is a global information and insights company with over 13,000 associates or employees. We represent 30 countries, with 8 being in sub-Saharan Africa. Secondly, we make trust possible. And we do that by ensuring each person is reliably represented in the marketplace. So how do we do that? We do it by providing an actionable view of consumers, and we steward that with a high level of care, right? It's so important for us. In addition, we've developed very much innovative solutions that has actually extended beyond our strong credit or core credit hold, and in areas such as marketing, fraud, risk, and advanced analytics. As a result, consumers and businesses alike can transact with confidence, right, and ease, and that allows them to do great things. And we at TransUnion call this using information for good. Right? And what that then leads to is economic profit, it leads to great experiences, and more importantly, personal empowerment for millions of people around the world. And we're super passionate about digital inclusion, as well as financial inclusion. So in a nutshell, that's who we are and what we represent.
All right. So in a nutshell, would you say that credit bureaus or TransUnion, they sort of build a profile of an individual based on your financial habits?
Correct.
So to say.
Correct. So think of it as a profile that talks to looking at patterns, behavior, additional data points that starts enriching you as an individual grow and evolve within the economy or the formal sector economy. And as a result, we particularly enjoy seeing almost like the cradle to grave processes where individuals enter as young professionals or youngsters and then evolve throughout their life and their journeys. Okay. And I think bureaus play a critical role to that because, as I said, we steered it with care. We built on massive data sets. We see things at an ecosystem level. And the beauty of that is putting it together and doing things with it. And information for good allows us to help to bring more people into that sector, more credit available, guide businesses in making right, responsible decisions as well, because they need to be profitable in what they're doing, and then support society. But from a risk prevention perspective, we equally hold a very strong responsibility in helping businesses and consumers not fall victim to fraud, to risks, to financial crime, to anti-money laundering. So it's like a combination of sorts.
Okay. Well, identity fraud seems to be a big problem in general, So how are fraudsters sort of evolving their tactics when it comes to credit fraud? And how are they using this basically to their benefit?
Right. So I think what we all know, and it's obviously preaching to this particular audience in businesses, is fraudsters and bad actors are so ahead of the curve. You know, you think of something today, and then the next thing there's a modus operandi that's actually exploiting the weakness and amplifying it on a larger scale. So what we're finding is, especially with a lots of channels coming in, being digital, being frictionless, being instantaneous, as well as a combination of traditional methods of working, we're finding identity theft is always going to be there. In fact, it's starting to deeply entrench itself into all of these various channels. We're seeing modus operandis from bad actors being a lot more sophisticated. They're not opportunistic fraud where the man on the street takes a chance and does something. This is organized crime. Lots of advanced analytics methods, brain power behind it. And it's playing out in different forms, right? So in the past, where we saw information or documents were stolen and reused, now we're seeing brand new documents and credentials being created fictitiously to perpetrate fraud. That's one of those things. And it's not easy, right? The second thing we're seeing, especially around deep fakes and generative AI, a lot of voices, recordings, videos of individuals are being impersonated to perpetrate the real person, but it's indeed fraud. The other thing we're seeing, which is not uncommon, the rise of or the increase of stolen or compromised personal credentials, like your phone number, your email address, your name, your surname, your ID number, your residential address. All of that is being used to exploit and perpetrate fraud. Another modus operandi that's coming up, which is a little bit harder to to detect, especially around application fraud in relation to identity fraud, is the rise of money mules, where authentic individuals are used and paid off by bad actors to literally facilitate and launder money. And then, of course, largely synthetic identity fraud still is one of those things out there. And it's starting to become a little bit harder to detect. Though I would wrap it up by saying a combination of rising economies, changing in the digital landscape, a combination of traditional plus self-assisted journeys are all fusing into it and making it a lot harder to be on top of fraud.
Okay, Amrita, thank you for that. And I'm glad you touched on the topic of synthetic identity fraud. But I think most of our viewers out there, they don't really know what it is, or they cannot distinguish the difference. So can you please just give a brief description of synthetic identity fraud? Because I saw it's quite an emerging, scheme nowadays.
Yeah, it is. So typically, identity fraud was sort of managed through taking documents like a stolen ID book or a card, replacing the photo, and off you go. You pretend to be that individual and you perpetrate fraud. Synthetic identity fraud is where actually all the credentials of the individual is now being created. So they're fake documents, fake information put together to create a persona or an identity, and fraud then is perpetrated. And we're starting to find that given access to information, the deep dark web is the marketplace for where bad things can be purchased. One would argue it's quite a large e-commerce database. So from that perspective, or online platform, from that perspective, anything is possible, So as a result, and with the fact that we're going so digitally heavy, it kind of makes sense for bad actors to want to get in quickly, use up information that works for that moment in time and expand it wherever possible. So that's the other reason why we're starting to see a rise of synthetic identity fraud.
It's quite scary knowing that, your details could be out there in the dark web being sold, so which just brings, the urgency and the stress to the public to just please protect your digital information out there. Be careful where you click. Be careful how you store your digital information, because it can be used against you at a later stage.
You make such an important point, because the other thing we're starting to see, which is an old tactic but a very material tactic, is the use of social engineering. you play on the minds of individuals, their psyche, and you don't know what space of mind they're in. And either through phishing, like you've mentioned, clicking into a link, takes you to a spoofed site, looks absolutely legit, authentic. You'd actually imagine you're engaging, as an example, with your bank, and before you know it, you've given all these credentials, they've got it, and off they go, depleting your bank accounts, and you know about these things months later when there's debt outstanding. And I suppose we must never underestimate the impact of looking at stuff on face value and really drilling into it.
Exactly.
And asking questions like, is this actually possible? Would my institution do this for me? Is this out of character behavior, as opposed to just being so, like, we're a really trusting society, though we have to kind of step up and be vigilant,
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things that Francois stressed on, where he actually just advised the public to just go the extra mile in doing your due diligence. Look at the reviews of the company, or the individual, perhaps. Look at their profile. Just basically, if anything seems amiss, then just follow your gut instinct. While we're on that note, how can the public at large protect themselves from emerging fraudulent trends? Are there any tips that you can share from your experience in the credit landscape?
Yeah, such a good point, because prevention is cure, and knowledge is power. Education and being self-aware is just it's starting to become a superpower, if not already a superpower. So let's take it from two angles. So there's the duty of care from businesses and organizations, and then there's duty of care from us as individuals and consumers transacting. So if I just look at the businesses, or the commercial aspect angle, I think the duty of care from that perspective is, businesses ought to have safe and secure platforms and infrastructure and systems for consumers to interact on. So what does that mean? It means that if I'm going to be spending and doing a card not present e-commerce purchase, I need to have a safe platform to do my payment. So the payment gateways must have strong authentication, multi-factor authentication, strong and secure guardrails to avoid and negate perpetration of revenue leakage and fraud, right? The second thing businesses are actively doing, and it's like you can see it, it's visible. I'm sure when you interact, you see it all the time, is security is king, but allowing those experiences to be seamless and those customer journeys for clients to experience it must be frictionless. So you want to have things, checks done in the background. You want to have verification and prevention mechanisms, but it can't be super obtrusive that it's either abandoning transactions, or it's losing business, or it's frustrating the person because you're asking for too much. So there's that balance. The client customer experience is in the heart and center of it. You want to protect and preserve. You want to make sure you're giving safety and peace of mind. So there's that balance. So I would argue strategies in fraud prevention, detection, and mitigation. The system's just the system. How you carve those journeys and interact across there is more powerful and equally important, and kind of put ourselves in the shoes of consumers, right? And one of the other big things I would imagine that's critically important from a consumer perspective is to also have peace of mind that the individual that they're engaging is who they say they are, what they are, and the credentials they're providing is who they say they are. Yes. And there's massive tools out there. Like TransUnion, for example, like I said earlier on, we're more than just a core bureau. We've got a whole host of data, plus solutions, plus strategies, plus thought leadership, because we see the ecosystem. Data allows us to look at things, current, future, emerging threats and patterns. We can allow that to build policies, filters, and strategies to still support risk prevention and safety while dazzling clients. And there's a lot more that businesses can do, but I'm just trying to think of the big, impactful Pareto principles that will make a difference. On the consumer side, it's about being responsible and applying that same level of duty of care, like what you mentioned earlier on. we shouldn't be gullible and trust everyone openly. We should ask the right questions. Similarly with the bank account, would you leave your bank card plus your PIN number available and open for somebody to see? You'll never do that. But your digital identity is critically important. Your mobile phone is now your new digital wallet. Do you leave that phone unattended to, open for transactions to occur, which is very equivalent to a bank account, with the PIN number? We also need to read up about stuff. We also need to become more self-aware. As consumers, we must pay attention to what businesses are saying, what industry bodies are saying, what companies are saying to allow us not to share information, not to give our one-time password out, not to fall victim to phone calls pretending to be legitimate enterprises. And then equally, on both sides of the fence, education is critical. But as consumers, what do we do with that? And let's be real. There's so much of information. In fact, you'd agree there's an overload of information. It's hitting us at such a fast pace. How do we balance that? And how do we absorb the right type of information to make us better, but to make our society at large better?
Thank you. Those are quite some valid points that you're making. And also just to dial back a bit, when you spoke about payment systems, I mean, there's been a rise in individuals that have fallen into e-commerce, doing drop shipping and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So what particular payment systems do we need to look out for? What are some of the credible payment systems that you can just highlight for us? Because sometimes when you pay, I think a lot of them now are using PayPal, but there's also MasterCard and other forms of methods of payment. But what can you advise the viewers to look out for, and what others can you not necessarily vouch for, but the ones that you do deem are credible?
Yeah. So look, we always take a very unbiased approach, largely because of who we are, and like we should. So we're super unbiased. But to be honest and frank with you, if we look at the maturity of our payment system, I would argue it's one of the best and strengthened in the world. And we compare that to first world countries. There's so much of investment, there's so much of security, there's so much of education and support in using these systems that whilst money still moves, exchange of hands, a large number of transactions are done digitally and over the internet or the web, if you want to call it that, So where we stand today, in my point of view, we've got really strengthened controls. We've got, like the ones you've mentioned, there's step-up authentication, there's one-time, there's secure pay, there's even fintechs are coming up with the most amazing payment aggregators today. They're smart, they're fast, they're efficient. And I would imagine, unless there's exploitation through third-party attacks, which we know we live in a world where it happens. Therefore, the security measures, the strengthening, the awareness, the detection, the monitoring on those ecosystems are very important. But then as a consumer, when you go and interact and you don't follow the process, or you're kind of negligent, and I apologize ahead if I'm offending anyone, but if you're not as responsible with your information and your assets, then the abuse can step in. And then more importantly, a lot of the banks are really great now where they do push notifications through their banking platforms. So those are other scenarios of where further security and protocol and stepped up authentication kicks in. I guess what happens is when we're not tuned in, and I think you said that beautifully, like when we in the moment and we're mindful, then we connected and we can very quickly pick up things that are right or wrong. It's because we're busy or distracted. You just go on robo mode, autopilot, and you do things without kind of resonating. So I think from that perspective, like I truly believe that our systems are quite strong and robust. Yes, can more be done? Absolutely. The same thing happens as technology improves, as patterns change, as consumer behavior changes. Absolutely. But in the current while and even to the immediate future, it's a really strengthened ecosystem.
I know you mentioned that, TransUnion is more than a credit bureau. You handle large data sets, you're part of the broader ecosystem. So how do you ensure that you stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So, as a bureau, or more than just a bureau, we first and foremost we possess an independent view, right? But it's also a holistic independent view that enables us to connect the dots and identify patterns and behaviors that creates indicators for either consumer profiling, risk profiling, marketing leads profiling, etc. So basically, there's components of we've got this massive data sets plus behavioral patterns of consumers and individuals interacting. What do we do with that, you know? And therefore, from a data perspective, it gives us the ability to look at profiling of this particular data, the particular behavior, and the transactional or just any service behavior of individuals. We can then slice and dice it in different segments. We can look at generational segments, you know, how are millennials and Gen Zs actually behaving and interacting in our ecosystem? How do we support the previous generations? You know, how do we help businesses to craft and create strategies to strengthen and increase their business goals and value proposition? How do we enable businesses and organizations to solve for critical business problems that are either emergent, which is a great place to be, or occurring right now, or importantly, managing and detecting in a positive way, right? And if we just wrap up the data piece, data then allows us, it's sort of the magic, it's the superpower to look at all these evolving patterns, evolving changes, evolving macro conditions, evolving digital amplification, omni-channel experiences, because as consumers, it doesn't matter whether you transact in a branch, in a store, face-to-face, on web, on your mobile, you want that same experience, right? And our duty of care is with this data, how do we help, as an example, to detect, mitigate, and prevent fraud? So we have a whole host of enhanced solutions through the enhanced data analytics that we have, plus the behavioral element to make it more real, impactful, and meaningful. And it's not isolated, it's carved into customer journeys, you know, so that businesses can detect these things silently. And for the end consumer, it's business as usual. They have peace of mind. In terms of consortium data, because that's magic, right? Like when you bring everything up to an ecosystem, how do we play nice with each other? Because we see cross-sector information, we see cross-border information. We're in a very unique position where we can team up with industry bodies to help detect, prevent, and fight against fraud, risk, and financial crime. We can also support financial inclusion by opening the gates of the informal sector into the formal sector. We can combat and give peace of mind for businesses that have to and ought to go digital as part of their offering. So suddenly we are able to just wrap up ourselves very uniquely together to serve businesses, serve consumers, serve society, serve industries, and then do good things. Because ultimately we want to have a society that's almost fully inclusive, access to digital functionality, but more importantly, a safe and a secure environment where financial crime and fraud risks are abated. So those are some of the things we do. We take this, we build tools, we become preventative and proactive, we work with our clients, we look and bring in thought leadership and best practices, we help build policies, we help guide on all of these things. And then more importantly, we also deliver a lot of reports. We deliver quarterly reports, consumer pulse surveys. In May this year, annually, we released our State of Omni-Channel Fraud report, where we show what are the global trends. We then bring it to what are the trends on the African continent through actual data gone through our ecosystem. We then can taper and whittle it down to what does it mean for South Africans? What's the data telling us? What's the fraud tactics and modus operandis? What's the survey of people? Because we also survey people in terms of propensity of good or bad things happening. And all of this collectively allows us to help and build better businesses, better consumers, a better society. And that's really, really our main aim. And doing information, it's like our mantra, information for good. We literally live and believe that in everything that we do.
Yeah, thank you for that, Amritha. And to all our viewers out there who are asking where they can obtain this state of omnichannel fraud report, we will be sure to post that in the description below. So again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to keep on going back to data and data because you guys have a vast amount of that. With data, obviously there are trends that you follow. So what changes can you anticipate in the next few years based on that data set?
Good question. So what we're finding, and if I just like maybe pull out some of the statistics that came out of our omnichannel fraud report, the 24 release in May, we see a couple of things. For starters, we see the rate of digital fraud attempts are increasing, more particularly in this round, the telecommunication sector. It went up quite largely when compared, like about 15% when compared to previous year. And I guess it's just the factor of where consumers are interacting and where businesses are booming, right? So just to wrap it up, what we're seeing when we look at year on year, it depends, what's actually driving the economy at that time. The prior year retail and shipping fraud was a big thing, and it made sense because it was during COVID time. Online and e-commerce was rife. Interception of parcels or deliveries were all exploited, and so the prior year was retail, last year telecommunications. But by and large, what we're seeing is a couple of things. Identity fraud is still a common issue. It's continuously growing. It's starting to become a lot more sophisticated and a little bit harder to detect, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is compromised credentials, used, either lost, stolen, misplaced, out in the open, into the bad hands, and of course, frauds committed. The third thing we're seeing, social engineering continues to grow and continues, and individuals continue falling victim to it. And that's something we must watch out for. The fourth important trend we're starting to see is deep fakes, generative AI, more how can I say, digitally created fraud that makes it, again, a little bit harder to detect, but it also tells you that the bad actors are running massive businesses, that they can actually come up with the strategy, the brain power behind the modus operandi, and then have businesses set up to do it, right? Equipment and. And then over and above, what we're finding is, by and large, even though we're moving into a very digital type of, or omni-channel type of environment, some of the traditional frauds are still coming up, which means that what we know where the risks are. We know what the risks are. With the data supporting us and the change in patterns, or sometimes some would argue humans are creatures of habit, certain things are consistent and repeatable. So the important point is to have a good handle on your data, structured and unstructured data, uplifting it and looking at it at a ecosystem or a consortium level can allow us to know exactly what's going to happen before they happen and sort of be faster and ahead of bad actors and fraudsters. So by and large, I would say similar things, just showing up in a different way, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you very much. How can businesses and consumers alike protect themselves from emerging fraudulent trends?
Yeah, good one. I think for the consumer, a very important cadence is actually getting access to your credit report. Now, all bureaus have the duty to provide a free report to end consumers per year. And of course, If that's not enough for you, you definitely can sign up to have regular reports as well as regular ticking or awareness when credit services are actually being requested on your behalf. And I guess what's important about that, it also supports financial literacy. It allows us to determine what's the makeup of how our scores and our credit history morphs us as individuals. And it's also a good preventative strategy, because if by any chance bad actors have got your information because it's compromised, you're already triggered and you're aware that this activity is happening, especially if you didn't do it, and you can be proactive and preventative and alert that particular organization.
And just in closing, you've taken up the platinum sponsorship at our upcoming conference in September. So what inspired, the need to collaborate with the ACFE?
True. And I loved your word, what inspired. You're quite right. I think let's start off by saying we have shared goals, both the ACFE and TransUnion. And those shared goals are really protecting and preserving our consumers and businesses and individuals, but at the same time also having a positive impact in the reduction of fraud and financial crime. So those shared goals was basically the catalyst for such a partnership. But more importantly, we also believe that leveraging the ACFE's extensive expertise, plus TransUnion coming along with, for most of what we talked about, the compelling data, the ecosystem view, the consortium view of patterns and behaviors, we can actually deliver some amazing stuff that helps us prevent fraud and protect our consumers at large, because that's really what we want to do, and ultimately reduce organized crime, financial crime, anti-money laundering, and all of those dark, deep-seated things that keep most of us awake at night. And if we then look at the collaboration, we literally see it coming together so beautifully to abate these challenges, but more importantly, leave us as a force to reckon with in terms of being preventative and proactive, within our environments. And that's by and large the inspiration behind the partnership with ACFE.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we're also glad to be collaborating with you guys as well. Well, without any further ado, that's it for today's podcast. Thank you, Amritha. I think our viewers have learned quite a lot from this episode. We'll be sure to see you again next time. Take note, take care. See you on the next episode of Fraud O'Clock.